What a year to be a fan of the UFC. 2022 has finished and has broken many records for the UFC, with Dana White boasting about the amazing consecutive sellouts they have had. The pay-per-view year for the UFC has been a mixed bag, with amazing pay-per-views which have over-delivered on nearly every fight, and some pay-per-views under-delivering with blockbuster main events. But what are the best and worst pay-per-views for the UFC in 2022? Let's find out. This is the Fight franchise, and all the UFC pay-per-views of 2022 ranked from worst to best. Number 13. UFC 272. The worst pay-per-view for the UFC of the year. UFC 272 had flashes of brilliance but overall under-delivered. One of the few UFC pay-per-views in the history of the UFC to have a non-title fight main event. The card would be headlined by former friends turned rivals Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal. The heat and bad blood had most fans hyped for this fight, but we all had our gut feelings that Covington was going to out-wrestle and dominate Masvidal, and that's what happened. Masvidal did have his moments dropping Covington, but this wasn't enough, and Covington secured an easy win. As for the rest of the card, the co-main event, Renato Moicano would be a late replacement to fight RDA in a 5-round fight, which RDA won 4 of the 5 rounds. Bryce Mitchell would dominate Edson Barboza on the ground. This card did contain some standout moments with submission wins from Marina Moroz and Umar Nurmagomedov, and some great KOs from Kevin Holland and Jalen Turner, and also Sergey Spivak, who used his superior wrestling and grappling to dominate and finish Greg Hardy. Overall, an underwhelming card with flashes of fun, but this isn't a pay-per-view one will go back to watch anytime soon. Number 12. UFC 270. The pay-per-view card which opened the year for the UFC, in which the main event didn't deliver what all the fans thought. UFC 270 featured 2 title fights, the heavyweights and the flyweights. The main event would see Francis Ngannou face former teammate Cyril Gane, in which most fans were expecting an amazing battle between 2 different strikers. Francis, the man with nuclear missiles for hands, and Cyril, the technical, light on his feet, pick you apart fighter. Gane would be technical and evasive on the feet, which saw the unthinkable. Francis and Ngannou wrestle, which was an amazing moment in the fight, but Ngannou would dominate with the grappling and defend his title. The co-main was brilliant back and forth war in one of the greatest rivalries in the UFC's history, between Figueiredo and Moreno, with Figgy winning on decision in one of the most entertaining and fun fights of the year. Pereira and Fiala had a fun fight, another Nurmagomedov submission win. The card also featured some KO finishes from Michael Morales, Matt Frevola and Jack Maddalena. This card was fun, but the main event left the fans wanting more. Francis Ngannou has spoiled the fans with some amazing KOs and set a standard for himself, which has fans watching his fight salivating, waiting for him to destroy another heavyweight. Number 11. UFC 274. This card, if it wasn't for a few fighters saving the card, would have been dead last on this list. A very decision heavy card which featured one of the worst fights in UFC history and the worst fight of 2022. Rose Namajunas defended her title against Carla Esparza and lost a decision in a fight which honestly should never be watched again. UFC, just do everyone a favour and bury this fight and just pretend it never happened. Most of the card featured decisions in some very close fights. Andre Filia would score a brilliant finish over Cameron Van Camp. Brandon Royval and Matt Schnell had a fun 1-round fight, which Schnell had Royval in a guillotine, and moments later Royval would finish Schnell with a guillotine. Then 2 fights which saved the card. Michael Chandler would viciously front kick Tony Ferguson, murdering the once boogeyman of the lightweight division, scoring one of the best KOs of the year and bringing some real brilliance into what was a very average card. The main event delivered, as Charles Oliveira and Justin Gaethje had one of the best 1-round fights in UFC history, which sent the fans in Phoenix wild. Even the post-fight speech from Oliveira was amazing and saved this card from being dead last on this list. One of the best fights of the year and one of the KOs of the year earned this pay-per-view a higher spot than the previous 2 mentioned pay-per-views. Number 10. UFC 271. The second pay-per-view of 2022 was a fun card with a lackluster end. This card was headlined by Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. In a fight, Robert Whittaker truly earned this rematch, beating all other contenders at middleweight. It was just that the fight under-delivered compared to the first time these two met in the octagon, with Izzy dropping Robert in the first round and outstriking and dominating most of the fight. The rest of the card had some real fun moments, with Tai Tuivasa and Derek Lewis in a straight heavyweight banger, with Tuivasa securing one of the best KOs of the year. Cannonier and Derek Brunson had a 2-round banger, with Brunson dominating the first round and Cannonier brutally finishing Derek Brunson with some hellacious elbows. Renato Moicano would secure a submission and Bobby Green put on a striking clinic against Nasrat Haqparast. The rest of the card had some notable moments, with Roxanne Modafferi retiring and some submission wins for Douglas De Silva de Andre, Jeremiah Wills and Kyler Phillips. The main card delivered up to the main event, with Izzy having a shutout dominant win. This card should be revisited to see Cannonier's brutal finish and go back and watch that Tai Tuivasa have a banger. Number 9. UFC 276. Back to back with pay-per-views headlined by Israel Adesanya on this list. Israel Adesanya is levels above nearly every single middleweight, bar one. More on that later. This pay-per-view is the same as the last entry, a dominant shutout victory by the Nigerian-born New Zealander. The best thing about the fight was Adesanya's Undertaker-inspired entrance. The co-main event was the third in a trilogy between two of the best featherweights ever, after their last fight ended in a somewhat controversial decision. This time it wasn't even close. Volkanovski put on a pound-for-pound legendary performance against not just one of the best featherweights ever, but also another top pound-for-pound fighter in Max Holloway. In a fight, he separated himself from his legendary Hawaiian rival. This card would see Israel's soon-to-be dance partner at UFC 281 brutally finish Sean Strickland to earn a title shot. The main card also featured a banger at welterweight between Brian Barberena and Robbie Lawler, which might as well been fought in a phone booth, with both men striking in the pocket in a back-and-forth striking match, with Barberena getting the standing TKO. Sean O'Malley and Pedro Munoz would unfortunately have a fight spoiled and finished due to an eye poke. The rest of the card would see a brilliant submission by up-and-coming lightweight Jalen Turner. It would also see Jim Miller retire the legendary Donald Cerrone. Both Ian Gary and Dricus du Plessis would secure great victories. Overall fun card with some great performances and a standout banger at welterweight. Number 8. UFC 277. The only pay-per-view in 2022 to be main evented by female fighters, which was a fun rematch of one of the biggest upsets in MMA history. Amanda Nunes dominated Juliana Pena in an entertaining fight in which Pena would just not give up, getting caught by some brutal shots on the feet and even landing herself, and when on the mat, Pena was throwing up submissions in a spirited performance. This fight was very one-sided, but also very entertaining. The co-main event was a brilliant back and forth between Moreno, who just seemed too fast for Kai Kara-France, finishing him in the third round with a brutal kick to the body, which folded Kai Kara-France, where Moreno finished him with strikes. Derek Lewis fought Sergey Pavlovich in a heavyweight banger, which Pavlovich would win, but would seem an early stoppage. Alexander Pantoja put on a flawless performance, submitting Alex Perez. Ankalaev dominated one of Conor McGregor's new enemies, Anthony Smith. Drew Dober would score a brutal body shot finish in his fight. Negumereanu and Morales would get TKOs in the prelims. Overall, this card was fun throughout, with some great fights and spirited performances by multiple fighters showing that dog inside them. Number 7. UFC 278. This pay-per-view sits much higher on the list due to the finish of the card, leaving every fan who watched this on a high for hours after the pay-per-view finished. The early prelims saw finishes by Alta Moreno and Amir Albazi. The prelims would be all decisions in some close fights, one which was a draw. The main card started great, with finishes by Tyson Pedro and Lucy Pulova. However, the main card would take a dip with a boring shutout fight between Jose Aldo and Merab Dvalishvili, which ended up being historic as it was Jose Aldo's last fight in the UFC, which looking back was a sad way for one of the greatest UFC fighters of all time to go out on. The co-main event was a dominant performance by Paulo Costa against Luke Rockhold in one of the most entertaining fights of the year, in which Luke Rockhold put on a gutsy performance, showing the world he actually has a chin and can take a punch. This would be Luke's last fight in the UFC like Jose Aldo, who fought before him, but this was a performance worthy of a fighter to retire on, even if he lost. The main event would be iconic in a 5-round fight which Leon Edwards became the first person to take down Usman and dominate the first round. Then onwards, Usman dominated and showed why he was the pound for pound best in the world. With a minute to go before Usman retained his title, Leon would throw a head kick which sent Usman to the shadow realm and sent the MMA world into a frenzy. The pound for pound best defeated by one of the best KOs in UFC history, shifting the entire landscape of the sport. This card needs rewatching to see the amazing co-main event, and due to the finish of the main event, this pay-per-view ranks a lot higher on this list just for how amazing it ended. Number 6. UFC 273. One of the most decision-heavy pay-per-views of the year, with only 3 finishes out of 12 fights. Nonetheless, this card featured one of the best fights of the year, pushing it so high on this list, especially due to the fact that Fight of the Year contender featured one of the biggest superstars in the UFC at the moment. The early prelims saw one notable finish, Alexei Olenek securing another submission victory. Mike Maylock KO'd Mickey Gall. Ian Gary kept his unbeaten streak going, winning a decision. The main card started with a win for Mark Manson and Mackenzie Dern, but the fight after these two stole the show, and this is why this pay-per-view ranks so high. The legendary Khamzat Chimaev, who looked invincible coming into this fight, was fighting former title contender Gilbert Burns. This fight was a war from start to finish. Whether on the feet or on the ground, it was unbelievable entertainment with drama throughout, with Chimaev almost finishing Burns in the first round and Burns almost finishing Chimaev in the second. Chimaev would win the eventual decision, with fans wishing this was a 5-round fight instead of 3. The high of seeing one of the UFC's biggest upper up-and-coming stars tested like this had fans buzzing for a good 2 weeks after the fight. The co-main event was a fun fight between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling, with Sterling coming in with a grapple-heavy approach, dominating round 2 and 3, with Yan securing round 4 and 5. Round 1 was razor close, but went to Sterling on 2 of the 3 judges' cards, meaning he would retain his title in a fun title fight. The main event, Volkanovski showed why he is one of the best in the world, putting on a dominant shutout versus the Korean Zombie. Overall, a really fun card carried by one of the best fights of the year. Number 5. UFC 280. This was a fight card which crescendoed into one of the most anticipated main event title fights in recent years. The prelims didn't electrify but had fun moments, with up-and-coming flyweight Muhammad Mokaev getting a brilliant win submitting Malcolm Gordon in the 3rd round. Nikita Krylov got a great win over Volkan Ozdemir, and then the impossible. Bilal Muhammad got a finish in an absolute banger of a fight against Sean Brady, getting a standing TKO to shock the world and show he is a real problem at welterweight, and he would even take Brady's unbeaten record. The main card, Manon Fiorot beat Caitlin Chookagian, but Neil Dariush beat Gamrot in a grapple-heavy fight which fans had higher expectations for. Then the fight of the night, Sean O'Malley defeated Petr Yan in a back-and-forth war between both guys who landed amazing shots, with O'Malley landing the most damaging shots we have seen on Petr Yan. O'Malley would win a controversial decision, but it's a fight fans would love to see again. Aljamain Sterling would dominate an injured TJ Dillashaw, which looks like it was TJ's last fight after announcing a recent retirement. Islam Makhachev put on a clinic against one of the best and most exciting fighters in the world, Charles Oliveira, finishing Du Bronx with a submission victory, finishing the man with the most submissions in the UFC with a submission. Islam showed he has earned the right to be compared to Khabib and has cemented himself as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. Number 4. UFC 282, one of the most fun fight cards of the year, which suffered an unfortunate ending to the night. The last pay-per-view of 2022 saw 10 finishes in a row out of 12 fights, with amazing victories in the early prelims by Cameron Salam, TJ Brown and Billy Quarantillo. The prelims, Chris Curtis scored a brilliant KO over Joaquin Buckley, Edmund Shabazian got a great KO to finally get back on the winning side after a 3-fight losing streak, Jairzinho Rozenstruik showed why he's one of the most feared heavyweights with the first round KO of Chris Daukaus, and the youngest person to win a fight in the UFC, Raul Rosas Jr. would secure a submission in the first round. Ilia Topuria and Bryce Mitchell both went to war, putting their unbeaten streaks on the line, with Topuria submitting Mitchell after a fantastic performance. Dricus du Plessis finished Darren Till after dominating the first round and then Till coming back in the second. Du Plessis would submit Till and show he can be a real force at middleweight. Short notice Alex Morona would be brilliant against Santiago Ponzinibbio, dominating him on the feet, winning the fight until Ponzinibbio would land a brutal KO to win the fight. The next 2 fights would be great but would leave a sour taste in the fans' mouth due to the decisions. Paddy Pimblett and Jared Gordon had a great fight over 2 rounds. The 3rd round, Gordon would dominate in the clinch. Most fans and media had Gordon winning, but the judges gave the win to Paddy, which a lot of people didn't agree with. The main event for the vacant light heavyweight title was a brilliant tactical battle on the feet, which Anchor Live took to the ground in rounds 4 and 5 to dominate Jan Blachowicz. The fight would end in a split draw, meaning the vacant belt both men fought for remained vacant. An indecisive end to an amazing fight card with amazing finishes throughout just misses this from getting one of the podium spots ahead of it. Number 3. UFC 279. Another card of 2022 not headlined by a title fight, however this one delivered. This card was headlined by some of the biggest misfits and wild personalities of the UFC. This main card months before the fight was different. Come weighing day, the main card would shift due to the weight miss of Khamzat Chimaev. The early prelims was all decisions, but once the prelims began, a truly great pay-per-view began. Chris Barnett and Jake Collier had an amazing heavyweight scrap, which was back and forth with either fighter almost finishing each other, with Chris Barnett securing the win and treating us to his iconic celebration. Dennis Tulin would secure a great finish along with Jailton Almeida, who secured a submission victory. Julian Erosa would secure a dominant win. The main card was fantastic. Johnny Walker secured a fantastic submission win and spent the rest of the night in Vegas in his fight gear. Irene Aldana scored one of the most shocking KOs of the year with an upkick to the body, which is the first time we have seen that in the UFC. Daniel Rodriguez won a close decision in a back and forth fight with Li Jingliang, with most fans thinking the Leech won. The co-main event, the UFC's new villain would put on a dominant performance against a game Kevin Holland, with Khamzat showing the level he is at and giving one of the best post-fight speeches of the year. The main event would see a fight which felt 7 years too late, but was a fun fight between 2 legends of the UFC, with Nate Diaz submitting Tony Ferguson and riding off into the sunset dodging the bullet, which was Khamzat Chimaev. This is one pay-per-view you can go back and watch and enjoy with amazing action throughout with some legendary moments. Number 2. UFC 275. The UFC would bring a fight card which sport the Singapore fans with one of the best cards of the year, and also arguably the best fight of the year. The card would be filled with close fights and decisions, with notable performances in the early prelims and prelims, with Silviana Gomez with Juarez securing a great stoppage win and Mahehait securing a brilliant KO over Steve Garcia. The main card is what delivered and brought this card so high up on the list. Jack Madliana would secure a great first round KO over Ramzan Imov, then Jake Matthews would KO André Fiallo in a great welterweight fight, then a rematch of one of the best fights of 2020 and the greatest women's fight of all time. Zhang Weili would rematch Joanna Jędrzejczyk in an amazing fight which showed off high level martial arts both women possess. With the frantic first round fought on the feet and on the ground, the second round would continue at the same pace until Zhang Weili would land an exquisite spinning back fist to face plant Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Zhang Weili would earn a title shot off this fight and Joanna Jędrzejczyk would retire after this loss. What followed was a shock to most MMA fans: Valentina Shevchenko versus Talia Santos. Valentina's recent track record, she has dominated most fighters she has come up against. This time Talia Santos matched her in the octagon in a back and forth fight between both women trading rounds. This fight was amazing due to the shock factor of being able to see someone on Valentina's level. Valentina would win a split decision in a close fight which made for amazing viewing for all the fans. Then the main event is what helped carry this card to the second spot on this list. An all-out war of two different styles with back and forth action on the feet and on the ground in a 5-round fight which will definitely be in the UFC's Hall of Fame in the future. Jiří Procházka would secure the victory in a shock win on the ground, submitting Glover Teixeira after Glover almost finished Jiří on multiple occasions. This is a card you can go back and watch and enjoy for many reasons. Amazing KOs, a fight of the year, but our number one just had a card which ended up delivering throughout. Number 1. UFC 281. Israel Adesanya headlined 3 pay-per-views, 2 of which scored quite low on this list, but he also headlined the best card of the year. The UFC's annual MSG card delivered on an amazing level, with amazing fights and moments. The early prelims had great moments with Carlos Ulberg securing a KO victory, and Michael Trizano and Matt Favola securing brilliant stoppages. Erin Blanchfield put on a clinic against Molly McCann, derailing her recent success. Ryan Spann secured the most brutal KO, obliterating Dominic Reyes with a destructive jab to send Reyes to sleep. Renato Moicano would be flawless, submitting Brad Riddell and giving a post-fight speech to remember. Dan Hooker ended his 2-fight win streak with a great KO win. Chris Gutierrez brutally ended the career of Frankie Edgar with a knee, which sent off Frankie Edgar to a sad retirement. Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler had a star-studded back-and-forth fight, with Dustin Poirier securing the submission win over Chandler and proving he is still the elite of the lightweight division. Zhang Weili put on a clinic versus Carla Esparza to become a 2-time strawweight champion. The main event was one of the best fights of the year, in a technical striking matchup between 2 of the best strikers in the UFC, with Alex Pereira eventually securing the 5th round stoppage after being 3-1 down in the fight. To see the man who ruled the middleweight division with an iron fist lose was an iconic moment, which will be replayed for years to come. This card would deliver from top to bottom and had talking points for months to come from this pay-per-view. This card 100% deserves the number 1 spot on this list for being amazing throughout and containing iconic moments, brilliant KOs and amazing fights. UFC 281 was definitely the best pay-per-view of 2022. Do you agree with our list? Let us know down in the comments below. What is the best UFC pay-per-view of 2022? Put it down in the comments. Leave a like if you've enjoyed the video and subscribe for more amazing fight content coming soon. If you enjoy football, check out our other channel, The Football Franchise, for amazing football content on there. We hope you enjoyed this video and we'll catch you in the next one.